The centuries roll backward. The empire breathes again. The golden light of late afternoon falls across a vast peninsula where the waters of the Bosporus shimmer between two continents. Marble columns rise in long colonnades, their surfaces warm with the glow of a sun that has watched over this place for more than 1,000 years. The scent of incense drifts from open cathedral doors, and somewhere beyond the great triple line of walls, the murmur of 500,000 voices fills the streets of the most magnificent city the medieval world has ever known. This is Constantinople. This is Byzantium. And its story is unlike any other in human history. An empire that endured for 11 centuries. An empire that watched the western half of Rome crumble into dust, yet continued to thrive, to reinvent itself, to refuse the fate that swallowed every rival. From the moment Emperor Constantine I consecrated this city on the 11th of May, 330 years after Christ, standing atop the porphyry column in his new forum, to the final dawn of May 29, 1453, when the last emperor died fighting on these very walls, Byzantium wrote a chapter of human civilization so vast, so complex, so consequential, that its echoes still shape the world we inhabit today. We will journey through the complete arc of this extraordinary civilization. From its founding on the ancient Greek colony of Byzantium, through the permanent division of the Roman Empire in 395, into the golden reign of Justinian I and Empress Theodora, who raised the impossible dome of the Hagia Sophia and codified the laws that still underpin European justice. We will witness the devastating plague that killed millions, the wars against Sassanid Persia that nearly destroyed both empires, and the Arab conquests that stripped away the wealthiest provinces in a single generation. We will stand inside churches where icons were torn from walls during the bitter iconoclasm controversy, and then watch the Macedonian Renaissance restore Byzantium to glory under warrior emperors like Basil II, the Bulgar Slayer. We will feel the catastrophe of Manzikert, where a single afternoon's defeat opened the heartland of Anatolia to Turkish settlement forever. We will see Crusader knights, who called themselves Christian brothers, breach these walls in 1204 and subject this city to 3 days of unspeakable destruction. And we will follow the long, dignified twilight of the Palaiologan dynasty, as Ottoman armies tighten their grip until the final siege and the fall that echoed across the world. But this story does not end with conquest. Byzantine scholars carried the manuscripts of Plato, Aristotle, and Homer westward, helping ignite the Italian Renaissance. Orthodox Christianity, forged in Byzantine councils, remains the faith of hundreds of millions. The legal codes compiled in this city became the foundation of European civil law. From the golden mosaics of Ravenna to the onion domes of Moscow, Byzantium did not simply fall. It dispersed itself into the foundations of everything that followed. This is not merely a history lesson. This is a complete journey through time, from the first stone laid on these 7 hills to the legacy still unfolding in our own age. Some of the greatest mysteries of human achievement, the greatest triumphs of resilience and reinvention, are hidden in these walls, these mosaics, these ancient stones beneath our feet. If you find wonder in these complete journeys through lost civilizations, please subscribe so you do not miss our next exploration. Each week, we bring you the full story of a world that once commanded the horizon. Let us begin our journey. The Bosporus Strait catches the first light of morning, its surface a sheet of hammered silver stretching between two continents. Gulls wheel above the narrow channel where the waters of the Black Sea press southward into the Sea of Marmara, and along the western shore a triangular peninsula juts into the current like the prow of a ship. This is Byzantium, an ancient Greek colony founded 7 centuries before the Common Era, a modest trading post perched on one of the most strategically consequential pieces of land on Earth. To the north, a deep natural inlet curves inland like a horn, its calm waters forming a harbour so perfectly sheltered that sailors call it the Golden Horn. To the south and east, open water guards the remaining flanks. Any army approaching by land must funnel onto a narrow western front, barely 2 miles wide. Nature itself has drawn the blueprint for an impregnable capital. In the year 306, a young military commander named Constantine is proclaimed emperor by his troops in distant Britannia. The Roman Empire is fracturing, governed by rival claimants waging civil war across 3 continents. Constantine spends the next 18 years fighting his way to sole power. The decisive moment arrives at the Milvian Bridge outside Rome on the 28th of October, 312, where he defeats his rival Maxentius and enters the ancient capital as its undisputed master. The following year, the Edict of Milan grants legal toleration to Christians throughout the empire, ending generations of persecution. Yet Rome itself no longer suits an emperor's needs. The city sits too far west, too distant from the wealthy eastern provinces and the vulnerable Danube and Euphrates frontiers. Constantine's gaze turns eastward. After convening the Council of Nicaea in 325, the first empire-wide assembly to define Christian doctrine, he selects Byzantium as the site for a new imperial seat. Construction begins on a breathtaking scale. Engineers reshape the peninsula's 7 hills to mirror Rome's own topography. A vast hippodrome rises near the eastern tip, its elongated oval designed to seat 80,000 spectators for chariot races. Beside it, the first imperial palace complex takes form, its marble halls and terraced gardens overlooking the Sea of Marmara. Along the central ridge, a broad colonnaded avenue called the Mese extends westward, linking forums and public buildings in a ceremonial spine of limestone and porphyry. At the heart of the new city, Constantine erects a circular forum bearing his name. A towering column of porphyry, the deep purple stone reserved for emperors, rises from its center, crowned with a statue of the emperor himself rendered in the guise of the sun god, rays streaming from his bronze head. Christian basilicas begin to rise alongside temples still fragrant with pagan offerings. The old and the new exist in uneasy proximity, columns salvaged from ancient shrines incorporated into church foundations. On the 11th of May, 330, the city is formally dedicated. Ceremonies unfold in the Hippodrome, where a gilded statue of Constantine holding a small figure of the city's guardian Fortune is paraded before the assembled court. The city receives a new name, Constantinople, the city of Constantine, and a new status as the seat of Roman imperial power. Grain shipments that once fed Rome are redirected here from Egypt. Senators are enticed eastward with grants of land and palatial residences. A new Senate House opens its doors. The genius of the location reveals itself in commerce. Every merchant vessel passing between the Mediterranean and the Black Sea must navigate the Bosporus, and Constantinople commands both shores of its narrowest approach. Grain from the Ukrainian steppe, timber from the forests along the southern Black Sea coast, silk arriving overland from distant China, wine and olive oil from the Aegean islands, all funnel through this single choke point. Customs revenues pour into the imperial treasury. Constantine does not live to see his creation mature. He dies on the 22nd of May, 337, baptized only on his deathbed. But the city endures, its harbour fills with vessels, its walls extend outward to accommodate a swelling population, its churches multiply. The porphyry column still stands in its forum, stained by weather and time, anchoring a city that is no longer merely new, it is becoming eternal. The sons of Constantine inherit an empire and immediately set about destroying one another. 3 brothers divide the Roman world in 337, and within 13 years only Constantius II remains, having outlasted fratricide and civil war. Constantinople grows under his watch, its senate expanded, its granaries filled, but the theological quarrels that will define Byzantine civilization already burn hot. Constantius favors Arianism, the doctrine that Christ is subordinate to the Father, and bishops are exiled, recalled, exiled again in an endless ecclesiastical chess match that entangles throne and altar inextricably. Then comes the strangest reign of all. Julian, nephew of Constantine, raised in enforced seclusion among Christian tutors, ascends in 361 and turns back toward the old gods. He reopens pagan temples, strips Christian clergy of their privileges, and attempts to rebuild the Jewish temple in Jerusalem. The empire watches in bewilderment, but Julian's restoration dies with him on a Persian battlefield in 363, a spear lodged beneath his ribs. The pagan revival lasts barely 20 months. The decades that follow bring mounting pressure along every frontier. Gothic peoples, themselves pushed westward by Hunnic migrations from the Central Asian steppe, mass along the Danube in 376, seeking permission to cross into Roman territory. Emperor Valens grants entry, but corrupt officials starve and exploit the refugees. The Goths revolt. On the 9th of August, 378, outside the city of Adrianople in Thrace, Gothic cavalry shatter the Roman left wing and encircle the imperial infantry. Valens dies on the field. His body is never recovered. 2/3 of the Eastern Field Army perishes in a single afternoon, a catastrophe rivaling Cannae. From this disaster rises Theodosius, a Spanish-born general proclaimed emperor in 379. He settles the Goths as federates within imperial borders, a pragmatic but fateful compromise. In 380, his edict issued from Thessalonica declares Nicene Christianity, the sole legitimate faith of the Roman state. Pagan sacrifices are banned. Temples close across the eastern provinces. The Serapeum in Alexandria, one of antiquity's greatest sanctuaries, falls to Christian mobs in 391. Theodosius briefly reunites the entire empire under one ruler, but upon his death on the 17th of January, 395, the division becomes permanent. His elder son Arcadius receives the east, the younger Honorius the west. No emperor will ever again rule both halves. The east inherits Egypt's grain, Syria's cities, Anatolia's manpower, and the tax revenues of the most urbanized provinces in the Mediterranean world. The west inherits debt, overstretched frontiers, and Germanic generals whose loyalty proves conditional. Constantinople itself prepares for the centuries ahead. Under Theodosius II, beginning in 413, a new circuit of walls rises a mile west of Constantine's original fortifications. The Theodosian walls stretch 4 miles from the Sea of Marmara to the Golden Horn. A broad moat fronts the approach, followed by a low outer wall with towers, then the massive inner wall, 40 feet high, 15 feet thick, studded with 96 towers spaced at regular intervals. Fired brick alternates with bands of limestone in the construction, a technique that lends the walls both flexibility and strength. These defenses will repel every attacker for the next 1,000 years. The empire that shelters behind these walls is no longer simply Roman. Greek is the language of its streets and its scholarship. Christianity shapes its calendar, its law, its understanding of imperial authority. The Eastern Mediterranean's wealth flows through its harbors. The Western Empire staggers toward its end. Rome itself will be sacked by Visigoths in 410. But Constantinople stands firm, its triple walls catching the late afternoon light, its churches multiplying across every hillside, its identity quietly transforming into something the old Romans would scarcely recognize, and yet something that will prove far more enduring. A century and a half passes. The Western Empire dissolves into Germanic kingdoms, but Constantinople only grows richer, more layered, more certain of its divine mandate. By the year 527, a new emperor ascends the throne who will attempt nothing less than the restoration of Rome's full glory. His name is Justinian, born a peasant's son in the Balkans, elevated through the ambitions of his uncle Justin, and married to a woman whose origins are even more improbable than his own. Theodora, former actress and daughter of a bearkeeper at the Hippodrome, becomes his empress, his counselor, and in the empire's darkest hour, its salvation. The Hippodrome itself, that vast oval arena seating 80,000 is the crucible of Byzantine politics. The blue and green racing factions are not merely sporting clubs, but channels of popular fury. In January of 532, both factions unite against Justinian's oppressive taxation and his hated ministers. The cry of Nika, victory, becomes a rallying scream. Fires consume the central districts. The original Church of Holy Wisdom burns. The great bronze gates of the Senate House melt in the heat. For 5 days, Constantinople tears itself apart, and the emperor prepares to flee by ship across the Sea of Marmara. Theodora refuses. Her resolve stiffens the court. Justinian sends his general Belisarius and the eunuch commander Narses into the Hippodrome with loyal troops. The slaughter that follows claims 30,000 lives within those tiered stone seats. The Nika riots end in blood, but from that blood rises the most ambitious building program the medieval world will ever witness. Justinian commissions 2 mathematicians rather than architects to design his new cathedral. Anthemius of Tralles and Isidore of Miletus conceive a structure that defies the engineering conventions of their age. Construction begins in 532. 10,000 workers labor for 5 years and 10 months. Columns of porphyry arrive from Egyptian temples. Green marble comes from Thessaly, yellow from North Africa, white from the islands of the Propontis. The walls rise in courses of thin fired brick, bonded with thick mortar, a technique that allows the massive structure to flex rather than crack. The dome is the miracle. 180 feet above the polished marble floor, it spans 105 feet across, resting not on solid walls, but on 4 enormous pendentives that transfer its weight to 4 great piers. 40 arched windows pierce the dome's base, flooding the interior with light so intense that the golden mosaics covering the ceiling seem to dissolve the boundary between stone and sky. The effect is deliberate. The dome appears to hover, suspended from heaven by an invisible chain. On the 27th of December, 537, Justinian enters the completed Hagia Sophia. The interior is a cascade of surfaces: verde antico marble, Proconnesian white, slabs of Cappadocian onyx, all polished to mirror smoothness. Silver iconostasis screens catch the flicker of 1,000 oil lamps. Incense rises through shafts of winter light. Yet Justinian's ambitions extend beyond architecture. Between 529 and 534, the jurist Tribonian and a commission of legal scholars compile the Corpus Juris Civilis, the body of civil law, gathering, organizing, and harmonizing 1,000 years of Roman legal tradition into 4 monumental texts. The Codex, the Digest, the Institutes, and the Novellae will become the foundation upon which European jurisprudence is built for the next 15 centuries. Theodora shapes policy alongside her husband, championing laws that expand the rights of women, prohibiting forced prostitution, and granting mothers greater guardianship over their children. Her mosaic portrait in the church of San Vitale in Ravenna, face pale beneath a jeweled crown, eyes dark and unwavering, captures something of the iron will that held an empire together when its emperor faltered. She dies in 548, likely of cancer, and Justinian never fully recovers from the loss. The empire he is building stretches toward its greatest territorial extent, but the costs, in treasure, in lives, in the quiet accumulation of plague already stirring in the grain ships from Egypt, are only beginning to reveal themselves. The grain ships from Egypt carry more than wheat. In the spring of 541, rats scurry down mooring ropes along the wharves of Pelusium on the Nile Delta, and within weeks the pestilence spreads to Alexandria, then across the sea to Constantinople itself. But before the plague reshapes everything, the empire is still drunk on conquest. 8 years earlier, in 533, a fleet of 500 transport ships and 92 warships sets sail from Constantinople, carrying 16,000 soldiers under the command of Belisarius. The target is the Vandal kingdom of North Africa, Roman territory lost a century before. The campaign unfolds with astonishing speed. Belisarius lands near Carthage in September, defeats the Vandal king Gelimer at the battles of Ad Decimum and Tricamarum, and by the spring of 534, the entire province is restored to imperial control. Vandal treasure, gold plate, jeweled regalia, even relics looted from Jerusalem generations earlier, is paraded through the streets of Constantinople in a triumphal procession. The success intoxicates Justinian. In 535, Belisarius crosses to Sicily with only 7,500 men, beginning the invasion of Ostrogothic Italy. Naples falls after a siege. Rome opens its gates in December. By 540, Belisarius enters Ravenna and captures the Gothic king Witiges. The mosaics of the church of San Vitale, completed in 547, immortalize this moment of imperial triumph. Justinian stands flanked by soldiers and clergy, draped in Tyrian purple, a golden halo behind his head, holding a golden paten. Across the Alps, Theodora mirrors him in jeweled splendor. Yet Italy refuses to stay conquered. The Gothic king Totila rallies resistance, recapturing Rome itself in 546, then losing it, then taking it again. The peninsula becomes a wasteland. Aqueducts are severed. Fields lie fallow. Cities that survived centuries of barbarian migration are reduced to rubble by the war meant to liberate them. It falls to the aged general Narses to complete what Belisarius could not. At the Battle of Tagenais in 552, Narses destroys Totila's army. By 554, Gothic resistance ends, and Justinian issues the pragmatic sanction restoring imperial administration to a devastated land. The cost is staggering, and not only in gold. The plague arrives in Constantinople in the spring of 542, carried by fleas on black rats nesting in grain shipments. At its peak, 5,000 people die each day in the capital, then 10,000. Bodies stack in towers along the city walls when burial grounds overflow. Justinian himself contracts the disease and nearly dies. The pestilence radiates outward, to Antioch, to Alexandria, to Carthage, to the ports of Italy, killing an estimated 25 to 50 million people across the Mediterranean basin over the next 2 centuries in recurring waves. The empire that emerges is fundamentally diminished. Tax revenues collapse as farmland lies untended and workshops stand empty. The reconquered western provinces become liabilities rather than assets, requiring constant military expenditure to hold against Lombard invaders who pour into northern Italy after 568. North African fortresses, their massive limestone walls still visible in the Tunisian landscape, garrison troops the empire can barely afford to supply. Justinian dies on November 14th, 565, after nearly 4 decades on the throne. The empire he leaves behind stretches from the Strait of Gibraltar to the Euphrates, the most extensive Roman domain since the age of Theodosius. But it is an empire hollowed from within, its treasury drained, its population ravaged, its armies stretched across frontiers too vast to defend. The Hagia Sophia still gleams, the Corpus Juris Civilis still orders the law, the mosaics of Ravenna still radiate imperial confidence in gold and glass. These endure. But eastward, beyond the Syrian frontier, the Sassanid Persian Empire watches and waits, sensing weakness in the overstretched colossus. The reckoning that Justinian's ambition has deferred will arrive within a generation. The reckoning arrives swiftly. Justin II, Justinian's nephew and successor, inherits a throne encircled by threats his treasury cannot answer. Along the eastern frontier, the Sassanid Empire presses against weakened garrisons. In Italy, the Lombards pour across the Alps beginning in 568, seizing territory that Belisarius and Narses bled to reclaim. The empire contracts, and the decades that follow bring a succession of emperors struggling to hold what remains. Maurice, who takes the throne in 582, proves the most capable of these rulers. A disciplined administrator and military strategist, he reorganizes the frontier defenses, creates the exarchates of Ravenna and Carthage as semi-autonomous military commands, and achieves something remarkable, a favorable peace with Sassanid Persia in 591, after helping restore the Persian king Khosrow II to his throne. For a brief season, the eastern frontier holds. Then, in 602, a mutiny among Danubian troops elevates the centurion focus to power. Maurice and his sons are executed. The consequences prove catastrophic. Khosrow II, claiming to avenge his former benefactor, unleashes the full weight of Sassanid military power against Byzantine territory. Persian armies sweep through Mesopotamia, cross into Syria, and capture Antioch. In 614, Jerusalem falls. Sassanid soldiers carry away the relic of the true cross, Christendom's most sacred object, to Ctesiphon. By 619, Egypt is lost, and with it the grain that feeds Constantinople. The empire teeters at the edge of annihilation. Constantinople itself seems the last stronghold of a dying state, its provinces stripped away, its coffers empty, the Avars and Slavs pressing from the north. It is into this catastrophe that Heraclius sails from Carthage in 610, overthrowing the tyrant Phocas and claiming the purple. The young emperor finds an empire in ruins. For years Heraclius can do little but endure. He melts down church plate and strips gold from mosaics to fund his armies. The patriarch loans the treasury of the great cathedral itself. Slowly, methodically, Heraclius rebuilds. He drills new regiments, studies Persian tactics, and plans a campaign of extraordinary audacity. Not a defensive holding action, but a deep strike into the Sassanid heartland itself. In 622, Heraclius departs Constantinople by sea, sailing to the coast of Cilicia and marching his army eastward through the mountain passes of Armenia. The terrain is brutal, high plateaus swept by freezing winds, narrow defiles where ambush waits behind every ridge. Yet the emperor presses on, year after year, campaigning through the rugged highlands of the Caucasus, striking deep into Mesopotamia, drawing Khosrow's forces away from the stolen provinces. The decisive moment comes on December 12th, 627, near the ruins of ancient Nineveh. Byzantine heavy cavalry crashes into the Persian line in a battle fought through fog and winter cold. The Sassanid army breaks. Within weeks, a palace coup in Ctesiphon deposes and kills Khosrow. His successor sues for peace, returning all conquered territories and the true cross. In March of 630, Heraclius enters Jerusalem in a ceremony of profound solemnity, restoring the sacred relic to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. The empire has survived its most desperate crisis. Byzantine authority once again stretches across Syria, Palestine, and Egypt. Yet the victory is hollow in ways no one yet comprehends. Both empires, or Byzantine and Sassanid, are utterly spent. Armies are decimated, treasuries emptied, populations exhausted by decades of total war. The frontier provinces, fought over and ravaged repeatedly, lack the garrisons and loyalty they once possessed. The elaborate defensive systems that once guarded the Syrian steppe and the approaches to Egypt have crumbled. Far to the south, in the Arabian Peninsula, a new force is gathering. The Prophet Muhammad dies in 632, and the unified Arab tribes begin to look outward with a fervor and military discipline that neither shattered empire is prepared to resist. The century of Persian war has purchased survival, but consumed the strength that survival demands. The greatest threat Byzantium will ever face is already riding north across the desert. They come with a speed that defies comprehension. Within 4 years of the Prophet's death, Arab cavalry sweeps northward out of the Hijaz and collides with the exhausted remnants of 2 shattered empires. The Byzantine garrisons strung along the Syrian frontier are skeletal, their ranks thinned by decades of Persian war, their supply lines frayed, their morale brittle. Emperor Heraclius, aging and ill in Constantinople, receives dispatches that read like a cascading nightmare. The decisive blow falls on a scorching August day in 636 along the banks of the Yarmouk River in the Basalt country south of Damascus. A Byzantine army of perhaps 40,000, a patchwork of regulars, Armenian auxiliaries, and Arab Christian federates, faces a smaller but ferociously disciplined Arab force under Khalid ibn al-Walid. A blinding sandstorm rolls across the plateau. When it clears, the Byzantine line has disintegrated. Thousands perish in the ravines above the river. Syria, Roman for 7 centuries, is lost in a single afternoon. Damascus falls in 638. Jerusalem surrenders in 640, its patriarch handing over the keys of the city. The fortified coastal cities of Caesarea and Gaza hold out longer but cannot reverse the tide. Palestine, the land of Christian pilgrimage, passes under the crescent. Then Egypt, the golden province, the source of grain that feeds Constantinople, the tax revenue that funds the fleet. Alexandria capitulates in 642. The breadbasket is gone. The treasury staggers. Heraclius dies in 641, spared the final humiliation. His successors inherit an empire halved in territory and revenue within a single decade. The Mediterranean, once a Roman lake, becomes a contested sea. Arab fleets, built with Egyptian timber and crewed by Egyptian sailors, raid Cyprus, Rhodes, and the Aegean Islands. The colossal bronze statue of Helios at Rhodes, toppled by earthquake centuries earlier, is sold for scrap. Then the Arabs reach for the prize itself. In 674, a massive naval expedition enters the Sea of Marmara and establishes a forward base on the peninsula of Cyzicus. For 4 successive summers, Arab warships assault the sea walls of Constantinople. The city's survival hinges on a weapon so terrifying it enters legend. Greek fire, a liquid incendiary compound, likely based on crude petroleum, projected through pressurized bronze siphons mounted on the prows of Byzantine dromons, erupts across the water in streams of clinging flame that cannot be extinguished by seawater. Arab ships burn like torches in the strait. The siege breaks in 678, and a 30-year truce follows. But the reprieve is temporary. In 717, a second and far larger Arab expedition arrives, an army of perhaps 80,000, supported by a fleet of nearly 2,000 vessels. They encircle the city by land and sea. Constantinople's survival now depends on the newly crowned Emperor Leo III, an Isaurian soldier emperor who has seized the throne amid chaos. Leo deploys Greek fire again with devastating effect, destroying the Arab fleet in the narrow waters of the Bosporus. A brutal winter kills thousands of besiegers encamped in Thrace. Bulgarian forces, allied with Byzantium, attack the Arab rear. By the summer of 718, the shattered remnants of the expedition withdraw. The empire survives, but it is transformed beyond recognition. The sprawling Mediterranean commonwealth of Justinian's era has contracted into a compact state centered on Anatolia, Thrace, and fragments of Greece. The administrative apparatus adapts with characteristic Byzantine resilience. The old provincial system gives way to the themes, military districts where soldier farmers hold land in exchange for hereditary military service. The empire becomes leaner, harder, more militarized. Constantinople remains the largest city in Christendom, but its hinterland has shrunk dramatically. Along the Taurus mountain passes separating Byzantine Anatolia from the Arab-held Levant, a permanent frontier hardens. Fortified towns and signal fire networks stretch across the ridgelines. Seasonal raids and counter-raids become a way of life that will persist for centuries. The empire that once governed from the Euphrates to the Strait of Gibraltar now defends a border barely 300 miles from its capital. Yet the walls hold, the fire burns on the water, and Byzantium endures. The frontier holds, but within the walls of Constantinople a different war is brewing, one fought not with Greek fire and cavalry charges, but with hammers, whitewash, and theological fury. In 726, Emperor Leo III orders the removal of a monumental icon of Christ from the Chalk Gate, the ceremonial entrance to the Great Palace. Soldiers climb scaffolding to pry the image from its setting. A crowd gathers below. Some weep, others rage. A group of women reportedly attacks the soldiers. The icon comes down. In its place, a plain cross. The message is unmistakable. The emperor has declared war on sacred images. The roots of this crisis reach deep. Leo, a capable military emperor, who has saved Constantinople from the Arab siege of 717 to 718, grows convinced that God's favor has been withdrawn because Christians have fallen into idolatry. The veneration of painted panels and mosaic saints, he argues, violates the ancient commandment against graven images. Islamic and Jewish critiques of Christian image worship sharpen the anxiety. Military setbacks and volcanic eruptions in the Aegean seem to confirm divine displeasure. What follows is no mere policy adjustment. Imperial edicts command the destruction or plastering over of religious images across the empire. In churches throughout Anatolia and the capital, workers scrape gold tesserae from walls, chip away painted faces of saints, and coat shimmering mosaics beneath layers of lime plaster. Bare crosses replace the rich figural programs that once transformed interiors into shimmering visions of paradise. The contrast is stark. Sanctuaries that once glowed with hundreds of holy faces now stand austere, whitened, stripped to geometric abstraction. Resistance erupts immediately and violently. Monks become the fiercest defenders of icons, arguing that the incarnation of Christ sanctifies material depiction. If God took human flesh, then human flesh can be portrayed. The theologian John of Damascus, writing safely beyond imperial reach in the Umayyad Caliphate, produces treatises that become the intellectual foundation of icon veneration. Monasteries across the empire hide precious panels behind false walls, bury them in gardens, smuggle them to sympathetic communities. Leo's son Constantine V intensifies persecution after 741. Monasteries are closed, their properties confiscated. Monks are publicly humiliated, forced to parade through the hippodrome holding hands with women. Relics are destroyed. The Council of Hieria in 754 formally condemns icon veneration, though no patriarchs attend. The empire fractures along theological lines that map imperfectly onto older tensions. Military aristocrats in Anatolia generally support iconoclasm, while urban populations, monks, and the European provinces resist. The pendulum swings in 787. Empress Irene, ruling as regent for her young son Constantine VI, convenes the Second Council of Nicaea. 350 bishops gather and formally restore the veneration of icons, carefully distinguishing between worship owed to God alone and the honor paid to sacred images. Churches begin the slow process of uncovering hidden mosaics, commissioning new icons, restoring what has been lost. Yet the controversy is not finished. A second wave of iconoclasm erupts under Leo V in 814, driven again by military emperors who associate image veneration with weakness and defeat. For another generation, icons are removed, monks persecuted, theological arguments rehearsed with bitter familiarity. The final resolution comes on the first Sunday of Lent, March 11th, 843. Empress Theodora, regent for the young Michael III, orchestrates a solemn procession through Constantinople. Icons are carried through the streets and restored to the churches. The Patriarch Methodios leads the faithful in a ceremony that becomes permanently enshrined in the Orthodox liturgical calendar as the Triumph of Orthodoxy, a feast still celebrated annually. The scars remain visible for centuries. In churches across Cappadocia, careful observers can trace the line where plaster was applied over original paintings and where later artists repainted faces onto ghostly silhouettes. Some mosaics survive only because they were hidden, their gold grounds dimmed but intact beneath concealing layers. The iconoclast century reshapes Byzantium profoundly. Imperial authority over church doctrine is tested and ultimately checked. Monasticism emerges strengthened, its moral authority enhanced by persecution. The theology of images, refined through fire, becomes a cornerstone of Orthodox identity. And the rift with Rome deepens. The papacy has opposed iconoclasm throughout, and the theological and political distance between Latin West and Greek East grows wider with each passing decade, a fracture that will never fully heal. A new dynasty rises from blood. In 867, Basil, a peasant from the Armenian borderlands who has clawed his way through the imperial court as a horsegroom, a wrestler, a favorite, murders Emperor Michael III and seizes the throne. It is a brutal beginning for what will become Byzantium's most luminous age. The great palace complex sprawls across the southeastern tip of Constantinople's peninsula, its terraced gardens descending toward the Sea of Marmara. Within its labyrinth of marble halls, mosaic-floored reception rooms, and shaded courtyards fragrant with citrus and jasmine, Basil I begins the patient work of reconstruction. He overhauls the legal codes, commissioning a vast revision of Justinian's corpus that will produce the Basilica, 60 volumes of imperial law rendered into Greek. He strengthens the theme system, the network of military administrative provinces where farmer soldiers hold land in exchange for cavalry service, forming the backbone of Byzantine defense across Anatolia and the Balkans. Along the eastern frontier, fortified towns of cut stone and fired brick anchor a defensive line against Arab raids. Cataphract horsemen, armored head to toe in lamellar plates of iron and leather, their mounts similarly protected, drill in formations designed to shatter enemy cavalry with the weight of a massed charge. These heavy cavalry units represent the finest mounted warriors in the medieval world, and under Macedonian emperors they will transform from defenders into conquerors. The dynasty's intellectual flowering reaches its zenith under Constantine VII Porphyrogenitos, who reigns from 913 to 959. Born in the purple-draped porphyra chamber of the imperial palace, Constantine proves more scholar than soldier, yet his contribution to civilization is immeasurable. He commissions encyclopedic works of staggering ambition, the De Administrando Imperio, a manual of statecraft and geography describing every neighboring people and how to manage them, and the De Ceremoniis, a meticulous record of imperial ritual preserving centuries of court protocol. In the imperial scriptoria, scribes copy ancient texts onto fresh vellum, their careful hands preserving works of history, agriculture, medicine, and military science that would otherwise vanish. Illuminated manuscripts emerge from these workshops adorned with miniatures painted in lapis blue, vermilion, and burnished gold leaf. Yet the empire does not merely preserve, it expands. The general Nikephoros Phocas, a gaunt and ascetic warrior from a powerful Anatolian military family, leads a fleet that recaptures Crete in 961, ending over a century of Arab corsair rule that has terrorized the Aegean. The island's reconquest reopens sea lanes long strangled by piracy. Byzantine merchant vessels once again move freely between Constantinople and the ports of southern Greece, carrying silk, grain, and amphorae of wine. By 963, Nikephoros has parlayed military glory into the throne itself, and his ambitions turn eastward. Byzantine armies push deep into the Levant, and in 969, the ancient city of Antioch, lost to the Arabs 3 centuries earlier, falls back into imperial hands. The great walls of Antioch, rising along the slopes of Mount Silpius, once again shelter churches where the liturgy is chanted in Greek. The Macedonian Renaissance is not confined to palace and battlefield. Across the empire, monasteries serve as centers of learning and manuscript production. In Constantinople, the Magnora Palace houses a school where philosophy, geometry, and astronomy are taught. The intellectual energy of this era radiates outward. Byzantine missionaries carry Orthodox Christianity and the Cyrillic alphabet to the Slavic peoples, planting seeds of faith and literacy that will shape Eastern Europe for a millennium. The empire that emerges from this first century of Macedonian rule is confident, expansive, and culturally radiant. Its gold solidus coins circulate from Scandinavia to Sri Lanka, trusted for their consistent weight and purity. Its diplomats are received with deference in every court from Cordoba to Baghdad. And within the shimmering halls of the great palace, where mechanical golden lions roar and gilded birds sing from jeweled trees, the emperor sits enthroned at the center of a civilization that believes itself eternal, the living continuation of Rome, sanctified by God, illuminated by Greek wisdom, and defended by the finest army in Christendom. But the throne that seems so secure in the late 10th century is seized through fire and rebellion. Basil II ascends as a child emperor in 976, and powerful aristocratic clans, the Skleros and Phocas families, immediately challenge his right to rule. Civil war engulfs Anatolia. The young emperor survives only through a fateful alliance. He appeals to Prince Vladimir of Kievan Rus, who sends 6,000 Varangian warriors to crush the rebels. The price is extraordinary. Basil's sister Anna travels north to marry Vladimir, and in 988 the Prince of Rus accepts baptism in the waters of Cherson. An entire civilization pivots toward Orthodox Christianity, toward Constantinople's spiritual orbit, in exchange for an imperial bride and a regiment of axe-wielding Norsemen who will become the emperor's most feared bodyguard. With his throne secured, Basil turns his full attention to the empire's most persistent enemy. The Bulgarian Empire under Tsar Samuel stretches across the Western Balkans, from the Adriatic coast to the Danube, its capital at Ohrid nestled among mountains and lakes. For nearly 2 decades, Basil campaigns relentlessly through the narrow passes and forested valleys of Macedonia and Thrace. Byzantine military camps dot the landscape. Rows of leather tents, supply wagons, farriers hammering iron shoes onto cavalry mounts, the smoke of cooking fires rising against grey Balkan skies. The decisive blow falls at the Battle of Kleidion on July 29th, 1014. Byzantine forces trap a Bulgarian army in a mountain pass near the Strymon River. The victory is total, and what follows becomes the defining act of Basil's reign. He orders approximately 15,000 captured Bulgarian soldiers blinded, leaving one eye to every 100th man so they can lead their comrades home. When Tsar Samuel sees his broken army stumbling back to Ohrid, he collapses and dies within days. The emperor earns the epithet that history never forgets, Bulgaroktonos, the Bulgar slayer. By 1018, the Bulgarian Empire ceases to exist. Its territories are absorbed into Byzantine provincial administration. The fortress of Ohrid, once a royal capital, becomes the seat of an autocephalous archbishopric under Constantinople's authority. Byzantine governors replace Bulgarian nobles across the Balkans. Yet Basil is no mere destroyer. His reign represents the apex of medieval Byzantine power. Imperial authority extends from southern Italy, where Byzantine governors administer Calabria and Apulia, eastward to the Euphrates frontier, northward to the Danube, and southward into the approaches of Syria. The treasury overflows. Basil reportedly leaves 200,000 pounds of gold in the imperial vaults at his death. He lives with austere simplicity, wearing the dark cloak of a soldier rather than jeweled imperial vestments, sleeping in military camps more often than in the gilded chambers of the great palace. The cultural achievements of his era match its military triumphs. The Menologion of Basil II, a liturgical calendar completed around the year 1000, stands among the finest illuminated manuscripts ever produced, its pages alive with miniature paintings rendered in lapis lazuli blue, vermilion, and burnished gold, depicting saints and martyrs with a delicacy that reveals the extraordinary skill of Constantinople's court artists. Each figure inhabits a carefully rendered architectural or landscape setting, the brushwork precise yet luminous. When Basil II dies on December 15th, 1025, unmarried and without an heir, he leaves behind the most powerful state in Christendom and the Islamic world alike. The gold solidus bearing his image circulates as trusted currency across 3 continents. His armies are undefeated. His bureaucracy functions with practiced efficiency. The Theodosian walls stand unbreached. The Hagia Sophia's dome still floats above a city of nearly 500,000 souls. The empire appears invincible, a colossus straddling 2 continents, anchored by faith, law, and military discipline refined over 7 centuries of continuous Roman tradition. No one alive in 1025 can imagine how swiftly this supremacy will unravel. Constantinople in the early 11th century is a city that overwhelms the senses. The Mesi, the great ceremonial avenue paved in broad limestone slabs, stretches from the Augustion Square near the Hagia Sophia westward through a succession of forums, each one ringed by marble colonnades sheltering workshops, perfumeries, and silk merchants whose bolts of fabric shimmer in imperial purple, saffron gold, and deep indigo. The avenue pulses with commerce from dawn until the evening bells. Porters hauling amphorae of Aegean wine jostle past mule trains laden with Anatolian grain. The air carries the mingled scent of cinnamon from Ceylon, frankincense from Arabia, and fresh bread from the bakeries clustered near the Forum of Constantine. No city in Christendom or the Islamic world rivals this one. Population estimates place between 400,000 and 500,000 inhabitants within the Theodosian walls, a concentration of humanity unmatched anywhere west of Song dynasty China. The Golden Horn, that curving natural harbor on the city's northern flank, teems with vessels. Flat-bottomed grain barges from the Black Sea ports of Trebizond and Cherson anchor beside sleek merchant galleys from Amalfi and the first Venetian trading ships whose captains are beginning to negotiate permanent quarters along the waterfront. Genoese merchants follow close behind, sensing the fortunes to be made at the crossroads where Europe, Asia, and Africa converge. The Bosporus Strait itself is the engine of this wealth. Every cargo moving between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean must pass through this narrow channel, and Constantinople commands both shores. Furs from the Russlands, sable, ermine, fox, arrive alongside amber from the Baltic. Silk threads spun in Chinese workshops travel the overland routes through Samarkand and Tabriz before reaching Byzantine customs houses. Indian pepper, cloves, and nutmeg pass through Arab intermediaries before filling the warehouses along the harbour. The eparch, the city prefect, governs this vast commercial organism with meticulous precision. The Book of the Eparch, compiled in the early 10th century, codifies regulations for every guild: silk dealers, perfumers, grocers, notaries, goldsmiths, bakers. Each trade operates within strictly defined districts. Silk merchants may sell only in designated colonnades. Goldsmiths cluster along the Mesi near the Million Milestone. The imperial silk workshops of the Gynekaion, staffed by women working looms within the Great Palace complex, produce fabrics reserved exclusively for the emperor and diplomatic gifts, cloth so precious that unauthorized export carries the penalty of death. The gold solidus struck at the Constantinople Mint serves as the standard currency of international trade from Ireland to India. Its weight and purity, maintained with remarkable consistency since Constantine I, make it the most trusted coin in the medieval world. Copper fullers handle everyday transactions, purchasing bread, fish, lamp oil, while the solidus moves in the realm of silk purchases, land sales, and tribute payments. Foreign merchants accept it without question, a testament to Byzantine fiscal discipline. Yet beneath this dazzling surface, the decades following Basil II's death in 1025 revealed deepening fractures. His successors, his aged brother Constantine VIII, then a succession of emperors elevated through palace marriages and court intrigue, lack both military vision and administrative rigor. The great landed aristocracy of Anatolia, held in check by Basil's iron will, begins absorbing the small holdings of the farmer soldiers who form the backbone of provincial defense. The theme system, which for centuries has provided the empire with a self-sustaining military drawn from free peasant landholders, erodes as powerful families consolidate estates. Tax revenues flow increasingly into private coffers rather than the imperial treasury. The professional tagmata regiments stationed near the capital remain formidable, but the provincial armies thin and weaken. By the 1050s, the empire still gleams with wealth, its harbours still crowded, its mosaics still radiant with gold tesserae catching the light of 1,000 oil lamps. The Mesi still hums with commerce, but the military sinew that protects this splendor is quietly fraying, and the frontiers that Basil II sealed with blood and iron begin, almost imperceptibly, to soften. Yet beyond the politics and the wars, beyond the shifting frontiers and the intrigues of the court, there exists another Byzantium, one built not of armies and treaties, but of light, stone, and gold. It is a civilization that pours its deepest convictions into sacred space, and across the centuries from Justinian's age through the Macedonian Golden Era, the empire produces a tradition of religious architecture and sacred art unmatched in the medieval world. The process begins with the dome. Byzantine builders inherit Roman engineering, the arch, the vault, the pendentive, and transform these structural elements into theological statements. The dome becomes heaven itself, a curved expanse hovering above the congregation, and within its concavity gazes the face of Christ Pantocrator, the ruler of all. His eyes, rendered in thousands of tiny glass and stone tesserae, follow every worshipper. The gold ground surrounding the image is not mere decoration. It represents divine, uncreated light, the radiance of a realm beyond time. The creation of these mosaics is painstaking, almost liturgical in its precision. Artisans cut small cubes of colored glass, press thin sheets of gold leaf between layers of transparent glass, and set each tessera into wet plaster at slightly varied angles. This deliberate irregularity ensures that candlelight and oil lamp flame catch each surface differently, making the image shimmer and breathe. In the apse of a Byzantine church, the Theotokos, the Mother of God, sits enthroned, her deep blue Maphorion rendered in lapis-tinted glass, the Christ child on her lap radiating golden light. The effect is not illustration, it is presence. These techniques reach their supreme expression in the Hagia Sophia, where 40 windows at the dome's base dissolve the boundary between structure and sky. But the tradition extends far beyond Constantinople. In Ravenna, the mosaics of San Vitale glow with imperial and sacred imagery side by side. In the volcanic landscape of Cappadocia, monks carve entire churches from soft tufa rock, painting their interiors with frescoes depicting saints and scriptural scenes in earth-toned pigments, ochre, sienna, charcoal black, that survive 1,000 years in the dry darkness. The iconostasis, a screen of painted wooden panels separating the nave from the sanctuary, evolves across these centuries into a defining feature of Orthodox worship. It marks the threshold between the earthly congregation and the holy mysteries performed at the altar. Icons arranged upon it follow strict hierarchical order: Christ, the Theotokos, saints, and feast scenes, each painted according to inherited conventions that carry theological weight. The frontal gaze, the elongated features, the flattened perspective are not failures of technique, but deliberate choices, rendering figures as they exist in eternity rather than in fleeting earthly time. Monasticism gives these artistic traditions their most enduring home. In 963, the monk Athanasios founds the Great Lavra on the rocky peninsula of Mount Athos with the patronage of Emperor Nikephoros Phocas. The monastery becomes the first of an eventual 20 foundations on the holy mountain, creating a self-governing monastic republic that preserves Byzantine liturgical practice, manuscript illumination, and icon painting in an unbroken chain stretching into the modern era. Within these walls, monks copy texts onto prepared calfskin vellum, applying gold leaf to illuminated initials, binding pages between carved ivory or tooled leather covers. The liturgy itself transforms these spaces into multisensory experiences. Frankincense and myrrh rise from silver censers, filling the nave with fragrant smoke that catches slanting light from high windows. Byzantine chant, monophonic, modal, unhurried, reverberates against marble and mosaic, its melodic lines ornamenting scriptural texts with melismatic passages that seem to suspend time. Hundreds of candles and oil lamps reflect off gold surfaces, multiplying light until the interior glows as though illuminated from within. Every element connects. The architecture shapes the sound. The mosaics direct the gaze upward. The incense engages the body. The chant carries the word. Together they compose a single, integrated theology expressed not in argument, but in experience, a vision of heaven made tangible in stone, glass, pigment, and flame, enduring long after the emperors who commissioned these spaces have turned to dust. The sacred spaces exist to manifest heaven, but the palace exists to manifest power, and in Byzantium the two are inseparable. At the heart of Constantinople, sprawling across terraced grounds that descend toward the Sea of Marmara, the great palace complex is a city within a city, its corridors and courtyards connecting throne rooms, chapels, gardens, barracks, and administrative offices in a labyrinth that grows across centuries. Here, governance is not merely conducted, it is performed. The Chrysotriklinos, the golden throne room completed under Emperor Justin II in the late 6th century, is an octagonal hall crowned by a dome and sheathed in gold mosaic. At its center stands the throne of Solomon, a mechanical marvel of gilded bronze. When foreign ambassadors prostrate themselves upon the floor, the throne rises silently on hidden mechanisms, elevating the emperor above mortal reach. Flanking the throne, golden lions open their jaws and emit roaring sounds. Golden birds perched on gilded trees tilt their heads and sing. These automata are not mere entertainment. They are theology rendered in metal, declaring that the emperor sits at the axis of creation, God's chosen regent on earth. The emperor's body itself becomes a vessel of symbolism. The loros, a jewel-encrusted scarf of gold-embroidered silk wound around the torso and draped over one arm, weighs so heavily that attendants must support the sovereign during long ceremonies. Tyrian purple dyes the imperial boots, and only the emperor may wear them. The porphyra, a chamber in the palace lined with purple marble, serves as the birthing room for imperial children, granting them the designation porphyrogenitos, born in the purple, a status carrying immense legitimacy. Coronation unfolds within the Hagia Sophia, where the Patriarch of Constantinople places the crown upon the emperor's head, while assembled senators, military commanders, and clergy acclaim the new sovereign. The ceremony fuses Roman imperial tradition with Christian sacrament, transforming a political act into a divine appointment. From that moment, the emperor's image appears on gold solidus coins pressed in the imperial mint, his face gazing outward with the fixed frontal stare of an icon. Yet behind the spectacle operates a bureaucratic machinery of extraordinary sophistication. The logothetes, ministers overseeing distinct departments, manage the empire's finances, foreign correspondence, military logistics, and postal system. The logothete of the drome handles diplomacy and intelligence, maintaining a network of informants across foreign courts. The Sacellarios audits imperial expenditures. Provincial governors, military commanders, and tax collectors report through layered hierarchies, that funnel information towards the capital with remarkable efficiency. Eunuchs occupy a singular role within this system. Barred from the throne by their condition, they are trusted precisely because they cannot found dynasties. They serve as chamberlains, treasurers, generals, and even patriarchs. The parakoimomenos, the grand chamberlain who sleeps beside the imperial bedchamber, often wields influence rivaling that of any titled aristocrat. Their presence at the highest levels of administration is not an anomaly, but a deliberate structural feature, a counterweight to the ambitions of powerful aristocratic families. The Book of Ceremonies, compiled under Constantine VII Porphyrogenitos in the mid-10th century, codifies hundreds of rituals governing every aspect of court life: processions through the hippodrome, banquets in the Hall of 19 Couches, the reception of foreign envoys, the celebration of religious feasts. Nothing is improvised. The placement of every official, the color of every garment, the sequence of every acclamation follows precise prescription. This rigidity is not mere vanity. It projects an image of cosmic order, suggesting that the empire itself mirrors the harmony of heaven. Diplomacy operates as an extension of this ceremonial logic. Foreign rulers receive titles calibrated to their importance. Gifts of silk, gold, and relics flow outward, binding allies through obligation. Marriage alliances connect the imperial house to Frankish kings, Kievan princes, and Caucasian dynasties. Byzantine diplomats are trained to observe, to delay, to divide enemies against one another, a tradition so effective that the very word Byzantine enters later languages as a synonym for intricate political maneuvering. Within these purple-draped chambers and gilded halls, power is not simply held. It is choreographed, sanctified, and made visible in every gesture, every garment, every mechanical lion's roar, an empire governing itself through the deliberate orchestration of awe. But beneath the gilded ceilings and the mechanical marvels of the court, another world breathes, vast, quiet, and fundamental. It is the world of the field and the fishing net, the bread oven and the olive press, the world upon which the entire imperial edifice rests. Across the Anatolian plateau, terraced farmland stretches in long amber ribbons over hillsides of dry red earth. Small villages of stone and mud brick cluster around a central church, its modest dome whitewashed against the sun. These are the settlements of the theme system, administrative provinces where farming and soldiering are bound together. A peasant farmer holds his land in exchange for military obligation, tilling wheat and barley through the spring months, then answering the call to arms when frontier raids demand it. The village commune, not the individual, bears collective responsibility for taxes. Land is measured, disputes arbitrated, and harvests assessed by local officials who answer to the strategos, the military governor of the theme. This arrangement, refined across centuries from the 7th through the 11th, forms the backbone of Byzantine resilience. The agricultural calendar governs everything. Ploughing begins in autumn after the first rains soften the soil. Winter wheat grows slowly through the cold months. Spring brings the pruning of grapevines trained along wooden trellises, and by late summer the grape harvest fills stone-pressing vats where barefoot workers crush the fruit. Olive groves, silvery green against the rocky Aegean hillsides, yield their crop in late autumn. Heavy stone presses extract oil that serves as food, fuel for lamps, and a base for soap. Bread, olive oil, wine, and fish. These four staples define the Byzantine diet from emperor to peasant, varying only in quality and accompaniment. Along the Bosporus, fishermen launch small wooden boats before dawn, casting nets for mackerel, bonito, and anchovy that migrate seasonally through the strait. Salted fish becomes a traded commodity, packed in ceramic amphorae and shipped to inland markets. The rhythm of the tides and the migrations of fish schools dictate a life as ancient as the strait itself. In Constantinople's workshops, artisans labor in guild-regulated trades. The Book of the Epoch prescribes standards for bakers, candle makers, silk weavers, tanners, and grocers. A baker who adulterates flour faces public flogging. A silk dyer who sells fabric outside approved markets risks confiscation. These regulations ensure quality and prevent hoarding, binding the urban economy into a controlled but functional system. Inside a modest urban dwelling, wooden furniture is sparse: a low table, a chest for linens, a bed frame strung with rope. Ceramic cookware sits near a small hearth. Oil lamps of bronze or clay provide evening light, their wicks floating in pools of olive oil. Walls bear simple painted crosses or small icons. Family life centers on the household, where women hold legal rights unusual for the medieval world. Byzantine law permits women to own property, inherit estates, enter contracts, and initiate divorce under specific circumstances. Widows frequently manage family businesses and agricultural holdings independently. Education, at least in urban centers, reaches beyond the elite. Primary schools attached to churches teach reading, writing, and arithmetic to children of merchants and artisans. Literacy rates in Constantinople and major provincial cities like Thessaloniki and Trebizond exceed those of contemporary Western Europe. Students learn to read from the Psalms, progressing to classical Greek texts, Homer, Aesop, selections from ancient historians, preserved in the very scriptoria that serve the court and the church alike. The rhythms of ordinary Byzantine life are punctuated by the liturgical calendar. Feast days bring processions through village streets, communal meals, and rest from labor. Lenten fasting restricts diet to vegetables, legumes, and shellfish for weeks before Easter. The church bell marks the hours, calling the faithful to morning prayers and evening vespers, structuring time itself around devotion. These lives leave few monuments. No mosaic commemorates the farmer who feeds the army. No chronicle records the fisherman who hauls his catch before sunrise. Yet without these millions of unnamed hands, ploughing, pressing, weaving, baking, there are no walls to defend, no armies to march, no golden throne to rise before astonished ambassadors. The empire's true foundation is not marble or porphyry. It is soil, salt, and grain. Soil and grain sustain the body of the empire, but certain secrets sustain its supremacy, secrets guarded with the ferocity of state religion, hidden behind palace walls and workshop doors, transmitted only under oath. These are the technologies and traditions of knowledge that give Byzantium advantages no rival can replicate. In the imperial silk workshops of Constantinople, known as the Gyneikion, looms clatter behind locked gates. The fabric emerging from these workshops, imperial purple silk, woven with golden thread into patterns of griffins, eagles, and hunting scenes, is among the most coveted materials in the medieval world. For centuries, raw silk arrives along the overland routes from China at staggering cost, passing through Persian middlemen who control supply and price. Then, around 552 of the Common Era, during the reign of Justinian, two monks arrive in Constantinople carrying hollow bamboo canes. Inside, concealed from every border inspection, are silkworm eggs and the seeds of mulberry trees. The secret of sericulture, jealously guarded by China for millennia, passes into Byzantine hands. Within a generation, imperial workshops produce silk domestically. The mulberry groves of the Peloponnese and Syria feed the worms whose cocoons are unraveled into filaments finer than human hair, then dyed in vats of Tyrian purple extracted from murex sea snails. The finished fabric becomes a tool of diplomacy, gifted to foreign rulers as a mark of imperial favor, its export tightly regulated by law. Equally guarded is the weapon that saves Constantinople from annihilation. Greek fire, first deployed during the Arab siege of 674, is a liquid incendiary compound projected from bronze siphons mounted on the prows of Byzantine warships. The substance ignites on contact with water, burning on the surface of the sea, consuming enemy fleets in walls of flame that cannot be extinguished. Its exact composition remains unknown even today, likely a mixture of crude petroleum, pine resin, and other volatile substances, heated under pressure and expelled through nozzles. The formula is a state secret of the highest order, known only to the emperor and the Kallinikos family, traditionally credited with its invention. No written recipe survives. When enemy navies approach the sea walls of Constantinople, the siphon-equipped dromons of the imperial fleet transform the waters of the Golden Horn into an inferno. The psychological terror alone is devastating, but the empire's most enduring weapon is neither silk nor fire. It is knowledge itself. In the scriptoria of monasteries and the lecture halls of Constantinople, scribes copy manuscripts onto sheets of vellum, calfskin soaked in lime, scraped smooth with curved blades, stretched and dried until it becomes a surface that can preserve ink for 1,000 years. The works of Plato, Aristotle, Homer, Euclid, Ptolemy, and Galen survive the collapse of the Western Roman world because Byzantine scholars copy them, study them, and teach them generation after generation. The University of Constantinople, refounded in 1045 under the patronage of Constantine IX Monomachos, becomes the intellectual center of the medieval world. The polymath Michael Sellos lectures on philosophy, rhetoric, and the natural sciences, synthesizing classical learning with Christian theology. His chronographia offers penetrating portraits of emperors and courtiers, blending historical analysis with psychological insight. In monastic libraries, monks bend over desks lit by oil lamps, their reed pens scratching across vellum in the careful minuscule script that replaces older uncial letter forms. Astronomical instruments, astrolabes of engraved brass, allow the calculation of celestial positions. Medical texts compiled from Hippocrates and Galen inform the physicians who staff Constantinople's hospitals, institutions more advanced than anything in Western Europe. Mathematical treatises preserve geometric proofs that will not be rediscovered in the Latin West for centuries. These three pillars, the silk that buys alliances, the fire that destroys enemies, the learning that outlasts both, form an invisible architecture as essential as the Theodosian walls. They are the empire's truest defenses, the advantages that allow a diminished state to endure when larger kingdoms crumble. And of the three, it is the manuscripts that prove most immortal, carrying the voice of the ancient world forward through centuries of darkness into futures their copyists cannot imagine. But manuscripts, however immortal, cannot hold a frontier. And in the decades after 1025, the empire that Basil II built begins to consume itself from within. The great warrior emperor dies without an heir of his caliber. His brother Constantine VIII rules briefly, followed by a succession of emperors elevated through marriage, court intrigue, and aristocratic maneuvering rather than military competence. In the span of 50 years, the throne changes hands with alarming frequency, each transition weakening the institutional memory that holds the empire together. The powerful civil aristocracy of Constantinople, families enriched by trade and bureaucratic office, systematically dismantles the military establishment that secured the frontiers. Provincial armies are reduced. The theme system, which for centuries bound soldier farmers to the defense of their own land, erodes as great estates absorb small holdings and tax revenues are diverted from military budgets to courtly extravagance. The consequences manifest first at the periphery. In southern Italy, Norman adventurers under Robert Guiscard chip away at Byzantine holdings throughout the 1050s and 1060s. Bari, the last Byzantine stronghold on the Italian peninsula, falls in 1071, the same fateful year that shatters the eastern frontier. The arid plateau of eastern Anatolia stretches brown and golden under an August sun. Near the shores of Lake Van, the land rises in treeless ridges scarred by seasonal erosion. It is here, on August 26, 1071, that Emperor Romanos IV Diogenes leads a massive Byzantine army eastward to confront the Seljuk Turks and reassert imperial control over Armenia. Romanos is a capable soldier, but the army he commands is fractured by political disloyalty. Powerful factions at court actively desire his failure. The general Andronikos Doukas, commanding the reserve, owes allegiance not to the emperor, but to the rival Doukas family. Sultan Alp Arslan of the Seljuk Turks commands a mobile cavalry force skilled in the tactics of the steppe, feigned retreats, encirclement, relentless archery from horseback. The Seljuk horsemen ride light and fast, their composite bows delivering volleys that darken the sky above the Byzantine heavy infantry. When Romanos orders an advance, the Turkish centre melts away, drawing the imperial line forward and stretching it thin across the plateau. As afternoon shadows lengthen, Romanos signals a withdrawal. It is the moment of catastrophe. Andronikos Doukas, whether through treachery or calculated indifference, withdraws the reserve and spreads word that the emperor has fallen. The Byzantine rear collapses. Seljuk cavalry sweep around both flanks, encircling the imperial centre. Romanos fights until captured, the first Roman emperor taken prisoner by a Muslim commander. Alp Arslan treats his captive with unexpected generosity, releasing him after negotiating a ransom and treaty. But the damage is not in the battle itself, it is in what follows. Civil war erupts immediately. Romanos is overthrown, blinded, and left to die in exile. The Doukas faction seizes power, and in the chaos, no organized defense holds the Anatolian frontier. Seljuk Turks and Turkmen nomadic bands pour into the heartland, not as a single conquering army, but as a slow, irreversible migration. Within a decade, Turkish settlements spread across the central plateau, the very territory that for centuries supplied the empire with its grain, its taxes, and its soldiers. The landscape transforms. Grazing herds replace cultivated fields. Nomadic encampments appear where garrison towns once stood. the names of places shift from Greek to Turkish. Anatolia, the backbone of Byzantine power since the Arab conquests stripped away Syria and Egypt, begins its long passage into a different world. The empire does not die at Manzikert. It contracts, recoils, and endures, but it endures as something fundamentally diminished. The compact, resilient state that had survived Arab sieges and iconoclast turmoil now loses the geographic foundation of its strength. Constantinople remains magnificent, its walls unbreached, its harbours busy. Yet the hinterland that fed and defended it is slipping away, field by field, valley by valley, into the hands of peoples whose presence will reshape the region permanently. The disaster is not a single afternoon of battle. It is the decade of neglect that preceded it, and the generation of fragmentation that follows, a wound from which Byzantium will never fully recover. From the wreckage, a soldier rises. In 1081, Alexios Komnenos, a general of aristocratic lineage and ruthless pragmatism, seizes the throne from a succession of incompetent rulers and begins the painstaking work of reconstruction. The empire he inherits is besieged on every front. Normans under Robert Guiscard assault the Adriatic coast, Seljuk Turks occupy the Anatolian plateau, and Pecheneg raiders ravage Thrace. Constantinople itself, though unbreached, presides over a realm that has contracted to its most desperate dimensions since the Arab sieges 3 centuries earlier. The fortified palace of Blachenay, perched on the northwestern corner of the city walls overlooking the Golden Horn, becomes the new seat of imperial power. Its stone ramparts and terraced halls replace the crumbling magnificence of the old Great Palace complex. From these walls, Alexios orchestrates a recovery built not on overwhelming force but on diplomacy, cunning, and the careful husbanding of diminished resources. He reforms the debased coinage, introducing the hyperpyron to restore commercial confidence. He rebuilds the professional military corps, supplementing it with foreign mercenaries and feudal grants called pronoiai, binding the landed aristocracy to imperial service. Yet Alexios's most consequential act is also his most dangerous miscalculation. Seeking Western mercenary assistance to reclaim Anatolia, he dispatches envoys to Pope Urban II. The response exceeds anything he anticipates. In 1095, Urban proclaims the First Crusade at Clermont, and by 1096, vast armies of Frankish, Norman, and Flemish warriors begin arriving at Constantinople's gates, not as disciplined mercenary companies, but as independent military forces driven by religious fervor and territorial ambition. Tens of thousands of armed Westerners camp outside the Theodosian walls, their leaders eyeing the city's wealth with barely concealed hunger. Alexios manages them with characteristic skill, extracting oaths of fealty and ferrying the Crusader armies across the Bosporus into Anatolia, where they recapture Nicaea in 1097 and push eastward toward Jerusalem. The Crusades create a new and volatile political landscape. Crusader states, the County of Edessa, the Principality of Antioch, the Kingdom of Jerusalem, establish themselves along the Levantine coast, nominally allied with Byzantium, but fiercely independent. The Treaty of Devol in 1108 compels the Norman Prince Bohemond to acknowledge Byzantine suzerainty over Antioch, though enforcement proves elusive. The mixed architecture of Antioch itself tells the story. Byzantine domes beside Frankish towers, Greek inscriptions alongside Latin ones, a city caught between civilizations. Alexios's son John II, who reigns from 1118 to 1143, is remembered as the most virtuous of the Komnenoi. He campaigns relentlessly across Anatolia and into Cilicia, reasserting Byzantine claims over Crusader Antioch and pushing back Turkish frontiers. Byzantine cavalry in lamellar armor, overlapping iron or steel plates laced together over leather, ride in disciplined formations that recall the cataphract traditions of earlier centuries. John dies in a hunting accident in Cilicia, his ambitions for a restored eastern frontier unfulfilled. His son Manuel I inherits the broadest vision of any Komnenian emperor. Reigning from 1143 to 1180, Manuel engages simultaneously with the Holy Roman Empire, the papacy, the Kingdom of Hungary, and the Crusader states. He forges an alliance with the Kingdom of Jerusalem, and Constantinople welcomes Western knights, merchants, and diplomats in unprecedented numbers. Manuel dreams of reuniting the old Roman world under Byzantine leadership. But Anatolia remains the unhealed wound. In 1176, Manuel leads a massive army eastward to recapture the Seljuk stronghold of Iconion. At the mountain pass of Myriokephalon, his forces march into a devastating ambush. The Seljuk Sultan Kilij Arslan II destroys the Byzantine siege train and inflicts severe casualties. Manuel survives, but the defeat shatters any remaining hope of recovering the Anatolian heartland. The plateau that once supplied the empire's soldiers and grain is lost permanently. The Komnenian restoration, for all its brilliance, reaches its limit against geography and demography. When Manuel dies in 1180, the dynasty's energy dies with him, and the empire enters a period of chaos from which a far greater catastrophe will emerge. The chaos arrives swiftly. Within 2 years of Manuel's death, his young son Alexios II is strangled by his own cousin Andronikos Komnenos, who seizes the throne in 1183 and unleashes a reign of terror against the aristocracy. His brutality provokes a Norman invasion from Sicily. The Normans sack Thessalonica, the empire's second city, in 1185, slaughtering thousands. Andronikos himself is torn apart by a Constantinople mob that same year. The dynasty of the Angeloi that follows produces 3 emperors in 19 years, each weaker than the last, each more consumed by palace intrigue than by the disintegration unfolding beyond the walls. It is into this vacuum that the Fourth Crusade is born. Called by Pope Innocent III in 1198 to recapture Jerusalem, the expedition never reaches the Holy Land. The Crusaders contract with Venice for transport ships, but when they cannot pay the agreed sum of 85,000 silver marks, the blind and aged Doge Enrico Dandolo redirects them, first to sack the Christian city of Zara on the Dalmatian coast in 1202, then toward Constantinople itself, lured by a Byzantine pretender named Alexios Angelos, who promises gold, troops, and submission to Rome in exchange for his restoration to the throne. The Crusader fleet appears before Constantinople in June of 1203. The great chain across the Golden Horn is broken. The pretender is installed as Alexios IV, but he cannot deliver on his impossible promises. Tensions escalate through the winter. In April of 1204, the Crusaders attack again, this time with no pretense of restoration. On the 12th of April, Venetian ships press against the sea walls along the Golden Horn, and soldiers scramble through breached towers. Fire sweeps through entire districts. The defenders, outnumbered and demoralized by years of civil war, collapse. What follows over 3 days surpasses anything inflicted by Persians, Arabs, or Bulgars across 9 centuries of siege. Crusader knights strip the gold sheathing from altars in the Hagia Sophia. The great silver iconostasis is hacked apart and melted down. Reliquaries containing fragments of saints are pried open and their contents shipped westward to cathedrals in France, Flanders, and the Rhineland. The 4 gilded bronze horses that have stood above the hippodrome since the time of Theodosius are unbolted and carried to Venice, where they will adorn the facade of San Marco. Libraries burn. Silken vestments are slashed for their gold thread. Tombs of emperors in the Church of the Holy Apostles are broken open and looted. The accumulated treasure of 8 centuries, icons, manuscripts, ivory carvings, enameled reliquaries, gold liturgical vessels, scatters across Western Europe in an act of cultural plunder without parallel in the medieval world. A Latin empire is proclaimed, with Baldwin of Flanders crowned in the Hagia Sophia. Venetian merchants claim 3/8 of the city and strategic ports across the Aegean. But the Latin state is hollow from its inception, ruling over a hostile Greek population and controlling little beyond the capital and its immediate hinterland. Byzantine resistance crystallizes in exile. Theodore I Lascaris establishes a successor state at Nicaea in northwestern Anatolia, preserving the imperial administration, the Orthodox Patriarchate, and the machinery of governance. At Trebizond, on the Black Sea coast, the Komnenian grand-nephews Alexios and David found a second exile state. A third emerges in Epirus under Michael Komnenos Doukas. Of these, Nicaea proves the most viable, organized, disciplined, and strategically positioned to reclaim what has been lost. For 57 years the Latin Empire decays while Nicaea grows stronger. The Nicaean emperors rebuild the army, cultivate alliances, and wait. On the 25th of July, 1261, a small Nicaean force under General Alexios Strategopoulos finds the Latin garrison absent from Constantinople and slips through an unguarded gate. The city falls almost without bloodshed. Michael VIII Palaiologos enters the capital in triumph, processing on foot to the Hagia Sophia. The empire is restored, but the Constantinople he inherits is a ravaged shadow, its population halved, its treasures gone, its walls patched with rubble, its palaces gutted and overgrown. The wound of 1204 will never fully heal. The restored capital is a city of absences. Entire quarters stand empty, their roofless shells colonized by fig trees and wild grasses. The great palace, once the ceremonial heart of empire, lies abandoned, its mosaic floors cracked, its halls open to rain. Michael VIII relocates the imperial residence to the Palace of Blachernay in the northwest corner of the city, where the Theodosian walls meet the Golden Horn. From its windows, the emperor surveys a diminished realm. Constantinople, parts of Thrace, fragments of Macedonia, a handful of Aegean islands, and a tenuous hold on the Peloponnese. This is the empire of the Palaiologoi, the last dynasty reigning over ruins. Michael VIII proves a shrewd survivor. He blinds the young legitimate emperor, John IV Lascaris, to eliminate rival claims, and he turns his diplomatic cunning westward. Charles of Anjou, the French King of Sicily, assembles a coalition to retake Constantinople for the Latins. Michael counters by pursuing church union with Rome, sending delegates to the Council of Lyon in 1274, where Byzantine representatives accept papal supremacy. The union is a diplomatic fiction. The Byzantine clergy and populace overwhelmingly reject it, and the compromise satisfies no one, but it buys precious time. When the Sicilian Vespers uprising of 1282 destroys Charles of Anjou's power base, the immediate Western threat dissolves. Yet the true danger gathers in the east. On the frontiers of the shrunken empire, Turkish beyliks multiply across Anatolia. Around 1299, a minor chieftain named Osman founds a small principality in Bithynia, just across the Sea of Marmara from Constantinople. His warriors press steadily westward. In 1326, the Ottomans capture Bursa, making it their capital. By 1354, they cross into Europe. In 1369, they seize Adrianople, Edirne, and transfer their capital there, placing the Ottoman court closer to Constantinople than many Byzantine provincial towns. Inside the shrinking capital, an astonishing cultural renaissance unfolds in defiance of political collapse. The Chora Church, known as the Curia, receives a complete program of mosaics and frescoes around 1320, commissioned by the scholar and statesman Theodore Metachites. The mosaics shimmer with unprecedented naturalism. Figures twist in space, drapery flows with weight and movement, faces carry individual expression. Gold tesserae catch the dim light filtering through narrow windows, illuminating scenes of salvation with an intimacy that earlier Byzantine art rarely attempted. Metachites himself appears in mosaic, kneeling before Christ, offering the restored church, a private act of devotion in an age of public despair. Scholars like Nikephoros Gregoras and later Gemistos Plethon engage deeply with classical philosophy, reviving Platonic thought with an intensity that will soon electrify Italian humanists. Manuscript production continues in monasteries and private libraries, preserving texts that the Latin West has forgotten. But the walls tell another story. Sections of the Theodosian fortifications, damaged by earthquakes and neglect, receive patches of inferior brick and salvaged stone. The population, once approaching 500,000, dwindles to perhaps 50,000. Vegetable gardens and orchards fill the spaces between inhabited neighborhoods, giving the city the appearance of scattered villages enclosed by ancient walls. The Ottoman noose tightens. Sultan Murad I crushes Serbian resistance at the Battle of Kosovo in 1389, consolidating Ottoman control over the Balkans. His successor Bayezid I, called the Thunderbolt, lays siege to Constantinople itself in 1394. The blockade grinds on for 8 years, slowly starving the capital. Byzantine envoys plead for aid across Europe, finding sympathy but little substance. A Crusader relief army is annihilated at the Battle of Nicopolis in 1396. Salvation arrives from an unexpected quarter. In 1402, the Central Asian conqueror Timur destroys Bayezid's army at the Battle of Ankara, capturing the Sultan himself. The Ottoman state fractures into civil war among Bayezid's sons. Constantinople breathes again, but the reprieve is temporary. The Palaiologoi know, with the clarity of those who have watched the horizon darken for a century, that the Ottomans will return. They return. The Ottoman civil war among Bayezid's sons resolves by 1413, when Mehmed I reunifies the fractured state. His son Murad II resumes pressure on what remains of Byzantium, a capital, fragments of Thrace, scattered Aegean islands, and the despotate of the Morea in the Peloponnese. The empire that once commanded the Mediterranean now governs less territory than a modest Italian city-state. Emperor John VIII Palaiologos travels personally to Italy in 1438, attending the Council of Florence, where he accepts a deeply unpopular union of the Orthodox and Catholic churches in exchange for the promise of Western military aid. The aid never materializes in meaningful form. The union enrages the Byzantine populace and clergy alike, deepening divisions at the worst possible moment. Murad II dies in 1451. His son Mehmed, barely 21 years old, inherits the Ottoman throne with a single consuming ambition. Through the winter of 1451 into 1452, Ottoman engineers construct the fortress of Rumeli Hisari on the European shore of the Bosporus, its massive cylindrical towers rising in barely 4 months. Paired with the older Anadolu Hisarü on the Asian side, the two fortresses form a stone vice around the strait, choking Constantinople's access to Black Sea grain. Any vessel attempting to pass without permission is sunk by cannon fire. Emperor Constantine XI Palaiologos, the last Roman emperor, watches these preparations with clear-eyed resolve. His appeals to Western courts produce a trickle of volunteers, most notably the Genoese soldier Giovanni Justiniani, who arrives in January 1453 with approximately 700 well-armed men. The total defense force numbers perhaps 7,000 against an Ottoman army estimated at 80,000, supported by a fleet of over 100 vessels. The siege begins on the 6th of April, 1453. The Hungarian engineer Orban has cast an enormous bronze cannon for Mehmed, a weapon so vast it requires 60 oxen and 200 men to transport. Its stone projectiles, each weighing over half a ton, slam into the ancient Theodosian walls with a sound that carries for miles across the Thracian plain. Day after day, the bombardment continues, crumbling sections of masonry that have stood for 1,000 years. Each night, defenders fill the breaches with earth, timber, and rubble, rebuilding what dawn will destroy again. Along the Golden Horn, a massive iron chain stretched between towers blocks the Ottoman fleet from entering the harbour. Mehmed's response is audacious. His engineers lay greased wooden tracks over the hills behind the Genoese colony of Galata, and on the night of the 22nd of April, some 70 Ottoman ships are hauled overland on rollers, bypassing the chain entirely and splashing into the Golden Horn at dawn. The defenders now face attack from the harbour side as well, stretching their impossibly thin line even thinner. 7 weeks of bombardment, mining, and assault grind forward. On the night of the 28th of May, an eerie silence falls over the Ottoman camp after hours of prayer and preparation. The final assault begins in the small hours of the 29th. Wave after wave crashes against the walls near the gate of St. Romanus. Justiniani, wounded by a crossbow bolt or handgun shot, is carried from the ramparts. His withdrawal demoralizes the Genoese defenders. Ottoman janissaries discover a small postern gate, the Kirka Porta, left open, and pour through. Constantine XI, last emperor of the Romans, strips away his imperial insignia and plunges into the fighting at the breached walls. He is never seen alive again. No confirmed burial site is ever found. 11 centuries of continuous Roman imperial authority end in the grey light of a spring morning. By afternoon, Mehmed II rides through the shattered gates. He proceeds directly to the Hagia Sophia, its vast dome still soaring above the wounded city. He orders it converted into a mosque. Standing beneath the golden mosaics of the Pantocrata, the young sultan surveys the greatest prize in the medieval world, a city he will rebuild, repopulate, and rename. Constantinople becomes Istanbul, capital of an empire that will endure nearly 5 more centuries. But within the stones, the mosaics, the very street plan, Byzantium persists, layered beneath the Ottoman present like a palimpsest that refuses to be fully erased. The dispersal begins before the dust settles. In the weeks and months following the conquest, streams of refugees flow westward from the fallen capital, merchants, monks, minor aristocrats, and among them, scholars carrying the most precious cargo imaginable. Rolled into leather satchels, packed into wooden chests, wrapped in oiled cloth against the salt air of the Aegean, travel the manuscripts. Plato's dialogues copied onto vellum in the elegant minuscule script of Byzantine scriptoria, Aristotle's treatises on logic and natural philosophy, the histories of Thucydides and Herodotus, the geometries of Euclid, texts that the Latin West has known only in fragments or imperfect Arabic translations now arrive in their original Greek, carried by men who can read every word. The exodus is not entirely new. Byzantine intellectuals have been migrating to Italy for decades, sensing the empire's terminal decline. Manuel Chrysoloras taught Greek in Florence as early as 1397. George Gemistos Plethon electrified Italian humanists at the Council of Florence in 1439 with his passionate advocacy of Platonic philosophy. But the fall of 1453 transforms a trickle into a flood. Scholars settle in Venice, Florence, Rome, Padua, and Bologna, finding positions as teachers, translators, and advisors to Italian princes hungry for classical learning. Cardinal Bessarion, born in Trebizond, educated in Constantinople, and elevated to the Roman cardinalate, becomes the most influential of these exiles. His personal library, some 750 manuscripts in Greek and Latin, represents one of the finest collections of classical and Byzantine texts in existence. In 1468, he donates the entire collection to the Republic of Venice, where it forms the nucleus of the Bibliotheca Marciana. These volumes become seed crystals for the Italian Renaissance, their contents spreading through the new technology of movable type. The Aldine Press, founded by Aldus Manutius in Venice in 1494, begins printing Greek classical texts in elegant portable editions, making Homer and Sophocles available to any literate European for the first time. Meanwhile, the last embers of Byzantine sovereignty are extinguished. Ottoman armies overrun the despotate of the Morea in 1460, capturing Mistra, that exquisite hillside city where Plethon once lectured on philosophy beneath frescoed church ceilings. In 1461, Mehmed II's forces take Trebizond on the Black Sea coast, ending the rule of the Grand Komnenoi. The final successor states vanish from the map. Yet Byzantium finds resurrection in an unexpected quarter. In 1472, Ivan III, Grand Prince of Moscow, marries Sophia Palaiologina, niece of the last Byzantine emperor. She arrives in Moscow carrying more than dynastic prestige. The double-headed eagle of the Palaiologoi becomes the emblem of the Russian state. Byzantine court ceremonial, with its elaborate prostrations and hierarchical rigidity, reshapes Muscovite protocol. The Kremlin's Dormition Cathedral, completed in 1479 by the Italian architect Aristotele Fioravanti, blends Byzantine spatial theology, the dome as heaven descending, with Russian masonry traditions. Orthodox theologians in Moscow begin articulating a potent idea, that Moscow is the third Rome, heir to the spiritual authority that passed from Rome to Constantinople and now rests on the Moskva River. Back in Istanbul, Mehmed II rebuilds with astonishing energy. He constructs the Fatih Mosque complex on the site of the ruined Church of the Holy Apostles. He repopulates the city, compelling settlement from across his domains. Turks, Greeks, Armenians, Jews expelled from Spain. The old Byzantine street grid persists beneath new Ottoman neighborhoods. The cisterns still hold water. The Theodosian walls, though breached, still define the city's western edge. Hagia Sophia stands with minarets now flanking its massive buttresses, its Christian mosaics plastered over but not destroyed, as though the building itself insists on remembering. The civilization that created it has scattered like seeds carried on an autumn wind into Venetian libraries, Florentine academies, Russian cathedrals, and the very foundations of European legal and intellectual tradition. Those seeds take root in soil prepared across centuries. In the law faculties of Bologna and Padua, scholars pore over Latin translations of Justinian's Corpus Juris Civilis, the vast codification completed in the 6th century that organizes Roman legal thought into a coherent system of civil rights, property law, and contractual obligation. This Byzantine legal architecture passes through medieval canon law into the foundations of European jurisprudence. When Napoleon commissions his civil code in 1804, the structural logic, the division into persons, things, and actions, descends directly from Tribonian's compilation ordered by a Byzantine emperor nearly 13 centuries earlier. Today, the civil law tradition rooted in that code governs the legal systems of continental Europe, Latin America, and much of Africa and Asia. In a monastery on the Athos Peninsula, candlelight falls across an icon painted on seasoned wood. The gold ground gleams. The saint's gaze is frontal, penetrating, timeless, following conventions established in Byzantine workshops 1,000 years ago. Orthodox Christianity, shaped by the 7 ecumenical councils held between Nicaea in 325 and Nicaea again in 787, remains the spiritual inheritance of over 250 million believers across Greece, Russia, Romania, Serbia, Georgia, and the global diaspora. The Divine Liturgy of St. John Chrysostom, composed in Constantinople, is still celebrated in essentially unchanged form. Incense rises through domed spaces designed to evoke heaven descending to earth. On the island of Sicily, the Cathedral of Monreale displays 6,500 square meters of gold ground mosaics executed by Byzantine-trained artisans for Norman kings in the 12th century. Christ Pantocrator gazes from the apse with the same solemn authority found in the churches of Constantinople. These artistic conventions, hierarchical scale, frontal presentation, the luminous gold field representing divine light, flow into Italian panel painting, shaping the work of Cimabue and Giotto, bridging the passage from medieval to Renaissance art. In Moscow, the Kremlin's Dormition Cathedral rises with its 5 golden domes, its interior dense with icons arranged on a towering iconostasis. When Ivan III marries Sophia Palaiologina in 1472, he adopts the double-headed eagle of the Palaiologoi as Russia's state symbol. Moscow's claim as the Third Rome carries Byzantine imperial ideology into the modern era, embedding it in Russian political consciousness for centuries. Beneath the streets of Istanbul, archaeological excavations continue to reveal layers of Byzantine civilization. The Marmaray Rail Tunnel project uncovers a 4th-century harbor at Yenikapi, its timbers preserved in anaerobic mud, its cargo of amphorae still intact. The Hagia Sophia stands as it has for nearly 1,500 years, its dome still spanning 31 meters without internal supports, its walls bearing the faint traces of mosaics uncovered from beneath Ottoman plaster, the face of the Theotokos emerging again into light. An estimated 55,000 ancient Greek texts survive today solely because Byzantine scribes copied them onto vellum in monastic scriptoria and imperial workshops, preserving the works of Plato, Aristotle, Euclid, Homer, and Thucydides through centuries when Western Europe had largely forgotten them. Byzantium's 11 centuries of continuous existence represent the longest-lived empire in European history. It did not merely preserve Roman civilization, it transformed it, fusing Greek intellectual tradition with Christian theology and Roman administrative genius into something unprecedented. Its diplomats invented the protocols of modern statecraft. Its missionaries carried literacy and faith to the Slavic world. Its architects solved engineering problems that still challenge modern builders. Its legal codes underpin the rights of citizens in dozens of nations. The empire fell on a single May morning, but its substance, woven into law, faith, language, art, and the very stones of a city that still straddles 2 continents, endures beyond the reach of any conqueror. Thank you for journeying through the complete story of Byzantium. If this series has brought the past alive for you, please subscribe to the channel so you never miss a new exploration of history's greatest civilizations.